Brain teasers, riddles, the so-called Silicon Valley questions have recently become a more prominent and more common feature among job interviews. So this episode, as part of the interview series, is going to cover what the interviewer is looking for when those types of questions are posed and offer some tips and advice on how you can go about structuring your thinking and your answer and explain things along the way to come out on the right side of these somewhat tricky questions. Let's look first at what the interviewer is after when one of these questions is posed. And it's not necessarily the answer, because for some of these, certainly the estimation questions, how many golf balls can fit into an airliner or what have you, there may not be a correct answer, or indeed if there is a correct answer, the interviewer probably doesn't know it, themselves. It's more about looking at your process, how you're approaching problems and problem solvings. Do you have assumptions that you just run with straight out of the gate without questioning them that trip you up later down the line? Do you share a sense of logic and process with the interviewer as you go along so that it's very clear what your answer is? This is what the interviewer is really trying to get to. Can I throw you into a scenario where you're not really sure what the boundaries are, what the expected outcome is, and just see how you perform? And these riddle and these mind teaser type questions are a means of going ahead and doing that. So we're going to cover some examples and ways to tackle them here. To help make your thinking and your assumptions as explicit as possible and quite straightforward for the interviewer to follow, I'd recommend just having a bit of paper in front of you, a pen, calculator from your phone, for example, as well, if you're trying to do some guesstimations, and just lay out or write out all of the different steps and assumptions and calculations along the way, such that when you arrive at your final answer, or indeed if you get stuck and you can't come to a final answer, the riddle's just gotten the better of you, at least you've got a process or the beginnings of a process that shows that you didn't just randomly wander into this question without thinking about it. So let's look at riddles first. And riddles are one of those areas where it's just so easy to make assumptions that seem perfectly natural at the time, that really lead to the complete downfall in your inability to work out what the puzzle and what the answer is down the line further. So let's cover a few examples of those. One is going to be words with multiple meanings, or homonyms, words that are different but sound the same. So if the question is being posed verbally, you might not be able to know. For instance, if part of the riddle is, John is making dinner when he realized that he needed more time, could mean, oh shoot, I need another 10-15 minutes to make dinner. Or it could mean that he's gone to the herb cabinet and he's pulled out the jar of thyme and there's only a few little dusty scraps in the bottle of it, and he needs more time to be able to make the recipe effectively. You don't know which one of those two it is, but chances are your mind is going to pick one of those and run to it straight off. So this is where just laying out all of the words that are posed in the riddle, because they're all carefully selected and there's some words that are even missed out on purpose, is going to be really, really critical. And if you can ask questions, you may not get an answer. The answer may be, well, it is what it is, you work it out. But it's always worth asking for clarity if you can do on certain things. Like, for example, is it time in the hour or is it time in the year? Because that can make a difference to the answer. You'll also have assumptions. So for instance, you could have something like, Jennifer is standing on the street corner and on the other side she sees a father and a son. So what's going on there? Well, for many people, you would immediately race to, oh, it's a father and the father's son standing there together on the sidewalk, two different people, and they are related. Makes sense? Well, not necessarily. She could see a father and a son who have nothing to do with each other at all. They just happen to be on the sidewalk at the same time. She could see other people. There could be a daughter and a sister and a mother and what have you, and a cousin, but these aren't mentioned in the riddle. It's just that there's two characters that are picked out that she sees standing there. They could be one and the same person. I'm a father and I'm a son. men would be in many cases. So, it's not always very evident from the wording, what's going on in terms of how many people you have there. So just be really, really careful, in particular if the verbs that are used are ones that could agree with both, a singular noun or a plural noun, because that can be a really sly way to mess you up in terms of how many, objects or people or what have you you're actually dealing with in the scenario. Also assumptions to do with things like associations. A lot of riddles work on this basis. For example, one along the lines of a surfer is found injured on the hillside of a mountain in the forest. How can this be? And then people immediately race to assumptions of, oh, somebody was surfing and there was a tsunami and the tidal wave, threw him inland and he ended up on the side of the mountain there. Or, yeah, there was a surfer and, he was drowning and the air sea rescue helicopter went out and scooped him up out of the ocean, but that developed engine trouble and that ended up crashing into the side of the mountain, and that's how he gets it. And you just race to fill up all these sort of fantastical scenarios as to how that can possibly be, when the fact of the matter is, like, I'm a surfer. I could just be walking in the woods. You're just assuming when the word surfer comes out that there's somebody in there with their wetsuit, with their board, that has been in the ocean and then mysteriously, magically is turned up in the woods in the mountain, and you're trying to figure out why and how that happened, when in fact it's absolutely perfectly natural. So sometimes occupations, hobbies, other associations or descriptive words will be used in these riddles because they will instantly conjure in your mind, a really clear picture of, oh, this person is a cowboy, therefore they're on a horse and they're on a ranch. Well, maybe they're walking down the streets of New York City. You just don't know. So just be really careful of the wording. Again, ask questions for clarification. If you can do, you might just get a wry smile when you do this, but it's always helpful to try to plug any of those gaps. And then just take it step by step. Break down the scenario as it's posed. Be very clear, be very vocal. Don't always do this in your head. Be very vocal with the interviewer so that you're just laying out, okay, from what you're told me, I'm assuming that ... and this is my understanding of the scenario and the situation. And so I'm going to try to work out a solution based on and lay out your assumptions, lay out your thinking, come to an answer. Or, maybe you can't, you're not going to spend, 40 minutes working over this riddle in an interview. It's just not worth it. If you come after a few minutes and you just realize you're not getting anywhere, you haven't got it, at least if you've shown that you've been logical, you've been thoughtful, you've avoided the pitfalls of assumptions, because those are the bear traps that are laid all around these types of word game and riddle type questions, then you're still going to come out with a decent result even if you don't get the answer. Another type of typical category of question is going to be the estimate, the guesstimate, the how many in this situation, and these can range anything from how many coffee shops are there in Seattle, how many windows are there in all the buildings in New York City, how many golf balls can you fit into the back of a shipping container. There's an endless number of these things that can be pulled out of thin air and posed to you. So the most straightforward way is to just simply start to break things down. It's a little bit like the carnival, guess how many jelly beans are in this glass jar and win the teddy bear type prize. You just can't take a rough guess at how many out of thin air. That's not what they're looking for. They're looking for a process. So you could be very explicit in your process of, okay, I'm going to look at this jar of jelly beans. It measures approximately 5 inches wide and it's 8 inches tall. It's square at the base, so 5 inches deep as well. And the jelly beans are so big, so if I count off a square inch of it, then that square inch has got, whatever it's going to be, 6 jelly beans. I make that into a cube, and then I take that figure from the cube, and then I extrapolate that so that it's filling the entire size of the jar, and that's how I'm going to arrive at my answer as to, my best guesstimate as to how many jelly beans are in that jar. And that shows a very clear logical process. With some of these other questions, you can take it a little bit further as well. So, for instance, how many ping pong balls could you fit in a shipping container? You can think about it from a few different perspectives. One could be, well, how are these going into the shipping container? Because yes, of course, there is an answer where if you were to measure the ping pong balls and work out how many could fit into a square foot, square meter, whatever, and then get the size of a shipping container, guesstimate what that's going to be, and lo and behold, there will be X number of ping pong balls that could fit in the shipping container. But how do you get them in there? So if the doors are open, you can't keep piling ping pong balls in because they're going to fall out. Do you have a hole cut in the roof and they're just, dumped in from the top from a funnel? Or do you take the whole shipping container and turn it up on its end and open the doors and pour them in from the top, close off the doors and then fold it back down? That's fine. But when the container gets to wherever it's going and you open up the doors again, they're all going to fall out. So in cases like these, how many ping pong balls in a vehicle, container, airplane, or what have you, you can sometimes think about, well, what's the means of transporting these objects into that container? Is it just loose, or for the sake of expediency and efficiency, you could say, hey, look, if I'm tasked with putting as many ping pong balls into that shipping container as possible, then I'm going to use a forklift truck, I'm going to use pallets, and I'm going to have my ping pong balls boxed up, and I'm going to work out the size of my box and work out the size of that, and that way I can use I can use a very clear system and method to make sure that all these pallets are placed in it as best as possible, and that's going to be my answer. Or if it's on an airplane, am I going to take the seats out the airplane so I can fit more ping pong balls, or am I going to leave the seats in? Or there's just so many things that you can add into the question, and just be really explicit with the interviewer about what your assumptions are and what you're doing. And you can even give it a purpose. It's like, I'm a manufacturer of ping pong balls, and I have to ship this container off to Tokyo from San Francisco, and therefore I'm going to go about it this way. Boom, 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 and then off you go, and you can work out your answer. So it's always more important, the thinking and how you're going about the logic and the structure of your answer, than what the actual final number is. Yes, I'm sure there is an actual real number if somebody wanted to do the experiment, how many ping pong balls you could fit in the shipping container, but that's not what the interviewer is after. They want to know how your brain is working, how you're going to approach this kind of problem. And it certainly gives it a air of reality if you can throw into the whys and wherefores of why these items are going into the container, and why they're being transported or stored or what have you. It just fills out a little bit of color, and it makes your answer, no matter how near or far off base, as clear as possible. In summary, these brain teaser, mind bender type questions can throw a little bit of elements of fun into an interview scenario if you take it in the right approach, which I would suggest you do. And just have fun with that with the interviewer. Explain and be very precise about all your thinking, your assumptions. Don't fall into the pitfalls that we discussed earlier, and just make sure that everything is clear and logical, and that you've got a process they can follow along with. And that's going to be your best way of coming out on top and actually enjoying this type of question.